Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to our first ever publication success interview series. My name is Avi Staiman, and I am the CEO of Academic Language Experts. I want to thank you all for joining us for the launch of our publication success interview series. This is the first interview of our monthly series, where we will be speaking with innovative thought leaders in the field of academic publishing about how they are influencing research. We are thrilled to have 1,500 people registered for this event. I want to thank Katie and the entire Brill team for helping to make this such a big success. In today's program, we will interview Katie Chin, our dear partner from Brill Publishers. We will then take a peek at our upcoming events and finish with a selected question and answer from you, our audience. We urge you not to be shy and ask your questions on the Zoom chat. Your questions and feedback are important to us, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible. However, due to the size of the crowd, we may not be able to answer them all today. If you have a more personal question or want to discuss your specific research, you can reach out to any of the Academic Language Expert staff members who all have ALE at the end of their names and ALE virtual background, which is purple and white. Whatever we can answer during the session, we are happy to set a time to discuss with you in the coming days, as is Katie. The interview will be approximately 45 minutes and the Q&A about 15 minutes. Your interview is being recorded, and we will send everyone who registered a copy as soon as we can after the event.
Avi, could you just turn off the music for a second?
Thank you. Sorry about that. Before we kick off the event and meet Katie, I want to share some of our exciting achievements from 2020 with you. It was a challenging year for academics around the world, but we pulled together and are grateful and proud to have helped scholars translate, edit, and prepare their research in over 50 languages. Books we worked on were published with top academic publishers, including Cambridge University Press, Harvard University Press, Brandeis University Press, and of course, Brill. We also helped hundreds of authors to publish their articles in respected academic journals across the full spectrum of academia, from history and philosophy to biology and engineering. It is our mission to help scholars and authors achieve their dream publications and be a source of guidance and support throughout their journey. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce you to Katie Chin. Katie started her publishing career as an editorial assistant in the STM field of electrical engineering at Springer. After Springer closed their Boston operations in 2009, she transitioned to Brill. She began her time at Brill as the associate editor for Ancient Near East and Jewish Studies, as well as Contemporary China Studies. In 2014, she was promoted to acquisitions editor for Ancient Near East and Jewish Studies and has been working happily in that position ever since. Katie, thank you very much for taking the time to share your wisdom and to be with us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. This is a nice opportunity for me to kind of tell a little bit about what Brill does and how we can help people and just give people more information. So I'm excited to be here.
Great, fantastic. Thanks so much, Katie. Okay, so before we get started with some of the questions that I wanted to ask you about your work and about your connection with authors, I wanted to quickly get the temperature in the room, get a feel for the audience, and run a few quick polls so that we can get a sense of who is joining us today in the hopes of being able to really tailor this session for the majority of scholars that are attending. We obviously are aware that there are different, scholars at different stages of their career, and we'll try to make it as broad and general as possible. But this will help us to sort of get a feel. So I'm going to launch a poll. Everyone should see on their screens and just answer the answer that is most appropriate for you, and we'll give everyone 20, 30 seconds to do it. All right, we'll give everyone another 10 seconds, then we'll end the polling. I'm glad to see everyone checking in where they're coming from. That's very exciting. It's very exciting to see everyone from around the world. Okay. All right. So it looks like there's an interesting. All right. We'll share the results with everyone so everyone can take a look. So it looks like the most people are planning on submitting a book or an article more than a year from now. But there's also not an insignificant number of people, maybe it looks like about half, that are planning on submitting in the next 6 months. So that's good to know. Fantastic. All right, let me. Okay, no, I apologize. This is the same poll. I'm having an issue with. My apologies. Here we go. Okay. All right. I'm going to launch a second poll, which is about language and how people generally write. So go ahead and take it away. All right, fantastic. I'm going to end the poll there. And it looks like, okay, interesting. I'll share the results with everyone. So it looks like we've got about half of the participants today write in English and then have an editor review. I'm going to assume that most of those individuals are not native English speakers who don't have English as a mother tongue. We have a lot of attendees who do have English as their mother tongue, and then a minority who write in their mother tongue and then translate. Okay, fantastic. So that's great. That'll help us when we get to the portion about language, we'll be able to discuss that. Okay, let me see if I can get back to. Here we go. All right, and this is the third and last polling question that we have for today. Thank you for bearing with us. And it's about your previous experience with publication. Great. All right, I'm going to cut it off now. And it looks like, oh, interesting. Okay, so it looks like most people here have not yet published a book, but they have published articles. And then we also have, a minority who have published considerable amounts in the past, and also 13% who have never published anything before and are looking to learn. Okay, great. I think that's helpful for getting a little bit of the lay of the land. Great, thank you everyone for participating in the poll. We appreciate that. That lets us help. Okay, so Katie, let's just start off. We have a range. So I think we realized and we learned from the poll that there's a range of scholars here. Some of whom have published before, some of whom have not. Why do you think, or do you think that it's important for scholars to be aware of what's happening in the publishing world? Trends in the publishing industry in general. Do things actually change? Is it a very slow-moving world? And is it enough for me to just focus on my own research, or do I actually have to be constantly keeping myself up to date for what publishers are doing and how they work?
I think I'm going to speak about humanities because that's where Brill is based. So speaking from the humanities, I would say that the research that comes out in the humanities has kind of a longer shelf life than maybe some other subject areas. They aren't as fast moving as, say, maybe computer science or electrical engineering, where the technology is changing so fast that the trends are really important. I think in the humanities, it's more, somebody's research can still be used 10, 15, 20 years down the line occasionally. So I don't think that, necessarily being on trend with your research is necessary in the humanities. I think that you know, if you have something that we're interested in, we're going to be interested in it. We're not, well, we are paying attention to kind of the new areas that are coming out in the various fields. We're not solely focusing on those. We are still publishing other content, publishing things that, you know, topics that have been addressed before, because if the research is new and important and will be influential, then it's important for us to publish it.
Got it. So just piggybacking off your answer there, if let's say, you know, I'm a scholar in linguistics, okay, for the sake of argument, and I, you know, I've thought through a manuscript, or I'm working on a manuscript, or maybe I already have a manuscript that I'm considering publishing. How do I start the process of being able to understand which publisher is most appropriate, and maybe within that, if there's a particular series or you know, or editor that might be interested in that? How do I even start mapping out that landscape to understand where I should submit my research?
Yeah, so I think kind of a good place to start is when you're doing your research, think about the books and the journals that you reference. Who's publishing them? Where do they come from? You know, because oftentimes the content that you're using in your own research is maybe a good fit for where your research should be published. So if there is a particular book series that maybe you've referenced a couple of times, or even a journal, same thing. Look at the publisher for those journals or book series and see if they have something that would fit. Maybe it's the same series that you've been referencing, maybe not. If they have a journal, maybe they have a series that's related to the journal. That sometimes happens. So I think that's probably the best place to start, is to look at you know, the content that you used for your research, see where it's published, and see if those publishers would be a good fit for your work.
Yeah. Okay. And at what point in the process should that initial connection be made? Meaning, is it enough that I have a concept for a book in my mind, or a research project that I want to carry out, and I should start emailing you? Should I have a full manuscript that's already written and edited and totally ready to go? Or is there maybe some in-between stage that's appropriate? At what point in the process should people reach out to you or any of your colleagues?
I have to preface this by saying I'm not sure if this is the answer that everybody wants to hear, but any of those stages is a point at which you could get in touch with a publisher. If you have in mind the research that you're starting, and you already have a plan with the research you want to do, and maybe how you want the book or article or chapter to turn out, then you can approach us with a proposal at that point. If it's a little bit further down the line, and maybe you have a couple chapters written and a little bit more structure set up, you can contact us at that point. If you've already gotten to the point of writing the manuscript, then you can send it to us. Depending on what stage you send it to us, kind of depends on where we're going to go with it next. So if you have kind of an idea of a research in your proposal, or if you have a more, how do I say this, more concrete proposal with maybe some chapters or something like that, you can send it to either myself as the acquisitions editor, or if you know of a particular book series in which you want to publish, you could also talk to the series editor. Perhaps you know them, but all of their information, you know, all of our series editors are listed on our website. So if you know the series, you could also approach the series editor. What we do with the proposal is we'll take a look at it. If it comes to me, and I will take a look at it and see kind of which book series I think it would best fit in. If you have a particular series in mind, that's fine too. You can let us know. We will share the proposal with the series editors. They'll take a look at it. If they're interested, we can do a provisional agreement at that point. It's provisional only because all of our manuscripts have to undergo and pass peer review before they're fully accepted for publication. If you're at the manuscript stage, you would send the manuscript to us, and we would just go straight into the peer review process at that point, if the series editors are interested in the manuscript.
Got it. Okay. And what's the best way to actually reach out, whether it's to you or any of your colleagues? Is it, you know, I imagine that there's some sort of online submission process at some point, but is it also, you know, is it okay for people just to reach out via email and contact you? Like what, you know, just from a very practical perspective, once I do have that either concept or maybe proposal that I have ready, you know, what's the best way to move forward?
I actually would say email. And so email is the best way to reach out. We actually only have online submission for journal articles. And I can see actually one of my colleagues, Jeroen, just posted how to publish with Brill link, which gives a lot more information than what we're talking about here in the chat. So if anybody wants to reference that. But emailing us is probably the best way to go about it. Another way is when we're back to being able to have conferences in person, and you happen to be at a conference where a publishing representative is there, feel free to come up and talk to us about your project. That's another way to go about it. I should also say that, you know, I'm responsible for ancient Near East and Jewish studies, but obviously Brill publishes in a lot of different areas. We do have, and I know we'll be sharing the link at some point, but we do have a list of all the subject areas and the acquisitions editors responsible for the subject areas. So you can go online, find your subject area, and contact the person that you need to talk to. It may not be me, and that's okay.
Got it. Okay. So it's best to try and find. Now, I know there are often times where I ever, you know, scholars who are working in maybe interdisciplinary fields, and maybe it doesn't exactly fit into one category. So would you recommend just finding the person who's the closest, reaching out to them, and then they'll refer you on as a publisher?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that happens occasionally. I'll get approached with a proposal, and I'll take a look and I'll say, you know what, it doesn't exactly fit in any of the series I have, but my colleague has a series where I think it would fit. So we pass it along to them. And that happens quite a bit. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any preference in terms of the question that we asked in the poll in terms of previous publication experience? Do you give preference to scholars who have either published in general before, have a, you know, maybe richer or more robust publication history, either with Brill or outside of Brill, or are you really trying to put aside the publication CV and really just focus on the particular research at hand and the quality of that study or of that research?
Yeah, no, I would say that we certainly don't give preference to people that have published before, even if they've published with Brill. We are, of course, happy to have repeat authors come back to us because they've enjoyed their experience with Brill. But we're really looking at the content. To be honest with you, although we do ask for a CV and we do look at it, that's not what I'm focusing on when I'm looking at a proposal. I'm really looking at the content. And because we do...
Katie, I think you just went on mute.
Okay, am I back? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Sorry, so what I was saying was we don't have any preference. I would say, you know, we're really looking at the content. And because we work so closely with series editors, we rely on their expertise to help us really look at the content and tell us if they think it's quality, if it really fits with the series. You know, Brill's books tend to be very specialized, and although I do have a background in the humanities, I cannot be an expert on all of the subjects for which I'm responsible. So our series editors, our peer reviewers, all of those are very important in helping us evaluate content.
Got it. And is there some, you know, tidbit of advice that you could give to new scholars, to scholars who have not yet published a book, which seem to be a significant portion of the crowd here today, about, you know, common mistakes that you find, you know, that scholars make, or, you know, things to avoid, or things specifically that they can do that will help them, give them a step up, maybe on, you know, in the end of the day, it is a form of competition, right? We don't necessarily know who else is submitting and what the quality of their research is,
right.
You know, to improve the chances that our submission will actually get accepted.
Sure. I think that kind of the first place to start is really to think about the audience for your research. Think about who you're trying to reach, because starting there really dictates everything else, essentially. It dictates what publisher is best for your project, how you write your book, both the tone and the content, how much background information you include. Think about how you want your research used. And then also, once it gets to that point, thinking about how the book is marketed, and that kind of plays into the publisher. Now, speaking for Brill, you know, we're an academic publisher. We do, as I mentioned, tend to publish more specialized, focused volumes. So knowing that our audiences are somewhat limited in terms of the people who are actually going to use our content, you know, we're not necessarily going to reach, you know, hundreds of readers. We know that our end users are kind of limited. So keeping that in mind, if you have a book that is, you know, has information that a specialist would understand, but also is written in such a way that you want to approach a broader audience, then maybe Brill isn't right for you. Maybe you need a publisher that's going to reach the audience that you want to reach. If you want it to be more of a, oh, somebody's interested in this topic and they might pick it up at a bookstore, great. But if you're trying to really send out your specialized research and have it cited and used in academia, then maybe Brill would be better suited. So really just think about who you're writing for and where you want it to go.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful advice. And I think that like, you know, to sort of piggyback on what you're saying, you know, the more that your research can enter into some sort of conversation, maybe with other scholars and their research, I think, you know, can sort of liven up the research that you're doing and be a building block so that it fits in naturally to a specific you know, series or a specific topic. Does Brill ever put out any sort of call for proposals for manuscripts that are looking for? And if so, do scholars, you know, how would scholars become aware of that? I know that the focus of our conversation today is really mainly on book manuscripts, but I guess you can touch on journals here as well.
Yeah, I would say for sure that, apologies for the phone ringing in the background. I would say for sure that we do occasionally do call for manuscripts for book series. I would say that happens more with maybe newer series where we're trying to kind of build content and build the series a bit. I think it's more common that we would post call for papers for journals. I think you see that more often than a call for manuscript for a book proposal. But either way, when we do post a call for papers or a call for a manuscript, we would usually post it in places where the scholars are most likely to find it. For example, listservs for particular fields. I know for the fields in which I work, we use HNet a lot for Jewish studies. We use the Agade listserv for ancient Near Eastern Egyptology, and also that one also falls into some religious studies. We'd also use social media, email newsletters, or perhaps conference announcements. So if you're looking for places like that, I would say, you know, maybe sign up for some email newsletters, follow the publisher on social media, you know, sign up for listservs, and the announcements would be posted there. And oftentimes I know for people who are starting their publishing career or maybe starting their research, I see a lot of people posting calls for papers for conferences. So that's another option as well. That's not really tied into Brill, but it's another place too.
Yeah, and you know, oftentimes people can use those conference you know, papers and sort of as a stepping stone, get some feedback, turn them into, you know, larger, more well-developed manuscripts as time goes along. So, you know, that can be
absolutely. And sometimes we also get approached to publish conference proceedings, so as edited volumes. So it could be that a conference paper turns into a publication.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you just talk quickly about what is the difference between publishing with Brill or any other privately owned publisher versus publishing with a university press, you know, such as Cambridge or Oxford or, you know, Brandeis or, you know, et cetera? Like, does it really make a difference to the author, or is it just, you know, a matter of personal preference or wherever the best series is?
I think it's a little bit of both. So Brill is a unique publisher in that we've kind of built our reputation on publishing specialized texts. That's kind of what we do. And I think that our ability to still publish very specialized niche texts that have a limited audience is what makes us a bit different from university presses. I don't think that you really see the university presses publishing very specific research topics as much. And that's not to say that we don't also publish volumes that appeal to wider audiences, but that's not all that we do. And looking at what university presses publish, to a degree, they're looking for texts that appeal to the academic, but also to people who are interested in a project, but maybe don't have the training that an academic has. Whereas our books are really speaking to academics for the most part. Another thing too is that due to kind of our Brill's long history, we have fewer restrictions a lot of times with regards to color images, number of images. We don't require subventions for publications if your book passes peer review. And this also allows us to investigate unique opportunities to look at specialized projects, things like major reference works, maybe primary sources, digitization things, and invest in them when we think that they're of exceptional quality and fit within what we do. We also have more of an international reach that not all university presses have. I would say, you know, obviously Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, yes, they're very well established and international, but some of the smaller ones are not necessarily. We have offices in the US, Europe, and Asia, and as well as global distribution. And we're able to attend conferences when they're happening in the normal world and connect with authors, editors, and readers throughout the world. So having that worldwide network set up really helps authors reach their goal of dissemination of knowledge. So I think, and like I said, it kind of depends on, going back to what I said earlier about thinking about your audience and who you want to reach. A university press may reach a slightly different audience than one that Brill reaches. Like I said, they're looking for a little bit less specialized, a little bit broader topics that can appeal to more people. Yeah, and I think that's kind of the main difference between the two of us.
Great. I want to encourage people, again, you know, you can write down your comments in the chat as we go along. And we'll be manning the chat and answer some of those questions at the end. I want to move on and talk for a minute, sort of get further into detail of what we started talking about before, which is what we like to call the publisher's package, or, you know, what sort of materials to put together when we're actually, you know, ready to get serious about submitting our book. Obviously, different publishers have different requirements, but what would you say are the key components of a publisher's package? Enough information, and in what sort of way should it be written to make it intriguing, to make you, you know, out of the 10 emails that you get every day with different proposals, say, oh, you know, this one seems interesting.
Okay, sure. So I have like kind of 4 main pieces that I need in a proposal. One is a prospectus, so basically a synopsis of your project. The second is a planned table of contents. We understand that that may not be the final one, and that's fine, but that gives us a bit of an idea of how you're structuring the volume. Also, if you're considering doing an edited volume, it's helpful to list your contributors on your planned table of contents so we know who is contributing to the volume. Also, again, this is now the 3rd time I've mentioned it, but your intended audience, who you're trying to reach, so we can tell, all right, are we going to be a good fit for your project? And also just a rough planned schedule of when you think the manuscript's going to be ready. Again, this is not something that we're going to hold you to, but just so we have a rough idea of when you think you're going to be submitting.
Got it. And is there a difference when you use the term synopsis? Is there a difference between a synopsis and an abstract? Like, how would you sort of decipher between those two things? Is a synopsis a little bit more, does it have like a little bit more of a marketing angle, or, you know, is that important, or?
Not so much a marketing angle. I would say that a synopsis gives a bit more detail than an abstract. When you think of an abstract, it boils the whole work down into like 3 to 4 sentences. So when we're talking about a synopsis, we're talking about really a bit more detail about your project. If you do want to go into why your project is different, better, expanded upon other books in the field, that's also helpful for us to know. So we can say, okay, what makes your book different than these other books that we've seen maybe of a similar topic or in a similar field? So that's helpful. So I would say go more on the synopsis prospectus side of things than an abstract when you're submitting a proposal, but also know that we don't need pages and pages and pages. A couple of pages kind of summarizing everything is best.
Got it. Okay, great. And let's talk for a minute about language quality or language services. When you know, I would imagine this is mostly for the non-native, non-mother tongue English speakers in the crowd. But there are plenty of, as I like to say, there are plenty of non-native English speakers who are brilliant writers, and there are plenty of English speakers who are terrible writers. So it's, not necessarily. But when someone is submitting a full-length manuscript, what is the level of quality that's expected of the manuscript in order for it to be published? Can someone submit a full proposal without working on the language? What do you recommend in terms of that process?
Yeah, so when we're talking about peer reviewing a manuscript, it certainly does not have to be edited for language before you submit it to us. That's not a requirement. However, I would say it does need to be readable. It does, it needs to be to a point where a reviewer can read it and understand the content without being lost a bit in the language. If, occasionally we get a manuscript and we know ahead of time that it will need some language editing, we can go to the peer reviewer and say, we know that this needs language editing, but we really want, kind of your evaluation on content first. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be done then. When we get to the point of the manuscript's been accepted, revisions have been made, all of that, we do want the copy editing done at that point. That's not something that Brill automatically provides for authors. It is something that you're responsible for. However, we do have freelancers and our friends at Academic Language Experts who can help with copy editing. And sometimes, we can suggest places where you might be able to find funding to cover the copy editing costs. There are different ways we can kind of work with it, but we can help certainly get you set up with language editing.
Got it. And I think when we had a conversation a few days ago, you had mentioned that in certain cases, there are instances where peer review can be done in other languages. Is that correct? Yes.
Yep. Because when you think about it, specifically in I would say more ancient Near East, but also Jewish studies to a degree. In ancient Near East, there are still books that are published in French and German because those are languages that people working in the field are expected to know. So we do occasionally still publish books in those languages. However, I would say nowadays it is preferable that everything be published in English because you're going to reach the widest audience that way. But we do have reviewers that can read Hebrew. We do have reviewers that can read French and German. We do, so it is possible that the original manuscript in the original language can be reviewed that way. However, if you are planning on translating it into English, know too that we will still need to review the English version once it's ready to be sure that it was an accurate translation of the original work.
Got it. Great. Okay, fantastic. All right, let's spend the last few minutes that we have in terms of our questions before we open it up to everyone else, talking a little bit about the world of open access. Sure. I find that there's a decent amount of confusion among scholars about. I mean, you're welcome to give a little bit of a background about how this sort of came about, but more practically and pragmatically, what is the bottom line in terms of what opportunities do people have to publish with open access, both in terms of journals and full-length manuscripts with Brill, and what does that process look like?
Yeah, so Brill was an early adopter of open access policies. We started back in 2009, making some of our content available in open access, and since then we've published over 500 books, 10,000 articles, and we have 30 fully open access journals, which means that all of the content is published in open access. And we also cooperate in various open access initiatives that help provide funding opportunities for open access. So essentially, if you're publishing with Brill, if you want to have an article or a book chapter or an entire book published in open access, that's possible. There are publication fees associated with publishing in open access unless you happen to be submitting and are accepted for publication in a journal that is fully open access. We also have another kind of caveat is that we have a few what we are calling transformative agreements right now, where scholars who are affiliated with universities in the UK, in Switzerland, and there's another one. It's listed on our website, but if you're affiliated, in the Netherlands, obviously. If you're affiliated with those universities, you can get your article in a journal published free of charge. So we have those listed on our website. I think we're going to post a little link to the open access. So that's one way to get your content published in open access. And also, we do, feel free to contact us. We have a list of places that provide funding for open access publishing. So we can put you in touch with how to apply for that funding. We also, say that maybe you got a grant and you have some money left over and you'd like some of your content to be open access. Talk to us about it. We can talk to our open access department and figure out a way to get at least some of your content published in open access. Yeah, so there are a lot of kind of different ways to go about it, but we are certainly an active participant in getting content published open access.
Got it. And that's something that I imagine can be decided later on in the process. That you don't need to necessarily decide, at the beginning when you're submitting your proposal.
No, certainly it can be done. Yeah, it can be done either when you're submitting it. It could also be done even after the book is published. Sometimes we have people come back to us maybe a few months after their book has appeared and say, hey, I got some funding. I'd like to make my book open access. And we can certainly do it at that point as well. Another thing to consider is if you are applying for research funding, think about building space into that budget for open access publication. Some funding agencies are requiring it now, but also if you're applying to another place, think, maybe I'll add money so that I can make sure that whatever research I publish is published open access. And I just saw my colleague just said he did post the link to the our open access page in the chat for those that are interested. Great,
fantastic. And okay, so to sort of wrap up our this part of the session in our conversation, is there, do you see any trends within, either related to open access or just in general, trends in the publishing industry that you think researchers should be aware of, should be considering, that may impact what the future of academic publications will look like? I know that the humanities and social sciences are a bit slower moving. Obviously, in the medical sciences, the last year has totally turned the publishing world on its head. I know it has not been as much of a revolution in the humanities world, but any sort of trends that you think, aside from just keeping track, which I think is really great advice, being on, if you're on socials, following the publishers and being aware of what they're interested in, and putting out just general trends that you think scholars should be aware of.
Yeah, I would say first, we're still publishing books and journals. And as much as people are moving to an online world, and we are too, there is still a demand, not as big, but there is still a demand for print. So we are still doing print journals and print books. And pretty much all of the content that we publish goes both simultaneously print and online. But we do see a trend of people utilizing online content to such an extent that kind of the online consumption has caught up with the print. It used to be the other way around. And now we're kind of, especially over the past year, seeing a definite turn more towards online consumption to a degree that we maybe hadn't seen a little bit, before. So we're looking into how we interact with that beyond having our books and journals published in online versions. We're looking at online reference works, digital humanities, online tools, and how our content can be used in different ways, and how it's consumed. And in terms of impacting the impact on research, I think that those two things are going to kind of play off each other. What we publish will impact research, and the way researchers utilize their content will affect the ways that we publish it. So we're kind of working together in a way and trying to make it so that we're still getting your content out to as many people as possible, which is ultimately the goal with publication, is the dissemination of knowledge. So, we're really trying to keep on top of both of those things.
Got it. Okay, fantastic, fantastic. That's really great. I think that there was a lot of really helpful information packed into a short amount of time. You did an admirable job, trying to lay out the, give a lay of the land. So I appreciate that. Okay, so before we head to the Q&A, which is the last part, I'm going to share my screen quickly, and I want to give everyone the opportunity here to sort of jot down our contact information. Just to clarify, people should be in touch with myself, or feel free to check out our website if you have any language or publishing needs. So what I mean by that is that includes academic translation, academic editing. If you need help with formatting, or sorting out your bibliography for a specific journal, or if you're working on a full-length manuscript, indexes for books. And in general, if you want an extra sort of pair of eyes to do, a type of peer review on your research, and just have a helping hand to be able to guide you through that publication process, to understand how it works, to help you prepare, a publisher's package that Katie will enjoy reading, then please do, feel free to be in touch. I've put here my email as well as the company website. And in the chat, I've put already a link to a Calendly, which is a calendar app where you can actually already go in and book a meeting at your convenience with myself or one of my colleagues whenever it suits you. And Katie, people should be in touch with you.
Yes, absolutely. If you have a book proposal or research idea that you want some feedback on, I'd be happy to take a look at it. You can certainly contact me at my email. If it's not a subject area that I'm responsible for, that's okay too. I can also pass it along to my colleagues. But I think at some point we did post a link to all of the acquisitions editors at Brill and the subject areas for which they're responsible. So you can also email one of them. But I'm happy to answer any questions about the publishing process from Brill's side of things, in terms of proposals, production, all of that kind of thing. So feel free to get in touch.
Fantastic. Yep. So yeah, so we'll hopefully, so someone will repost that in the chat, so that you can do a little bit of your own research and figure out who is the best individual to turn to. And if you can't find someone who's closest, or be in touch with Katie, and I'm sure she'll be happy to direct you.
For sure.
And I want to bring to everyone's attention our upcoming events. As I mentioned at the outset, this is the first in a series of what we're calling the Publication Success Interview Series. And we're going to be talking with different individuals. It's going to be once a month. That's the plan. And we're going to be talking to different individuals in the publishing world about their research, and how basically to stay on top of the latest trends and what's happening in the world of research. So I'm going to put in the chat momentarily a link to this page that I'm showing you right now. And this page is basically, next month we've got an interview with Matthias Estel, who's the Chief Journal Development Officer at Hindawi. I would say that if you have colleagues who are in the STEM fields, this will be very relevant to them. We're going to be talking about how they're trying to make an author-first approach, which is trying to make the whole process of publishing a lot more friendly for authors, and taking into account and being a lot more transparent, using data to become more transparent in terms of acceptance percentage and how long it takes to be reviewed, etc. In March, we're going to be interviewing Chris Harrison, who's the publication director at Cambridge University Press. He's going to be talking about some of the different new models that they're using for publication, beyond just the typical book, manuscript, or journal dichotomy. They're coming up with some creative sort of in-between new models for publication that you should be aware of. And then in June, there'll be other events, by the way, that we're going to be adding as time goes along. But in June, we're going to be interviewing Marshall Poe, who's the editor-in-chief of the New Books Network, who I imagine that many of you have tuned into their podcast. If you haven't, I highly recommend checking them out. They have podcasts in different areas, and he's going to talk about how to use new media after your book has been published. Hopefully by the time June comes around, you already have a book published with Brill, and it'll be a good opportunity to hear from him about how to use new media to really expand the research and maximize the impact. And I don't know if we really got a chance to discuss this, Katie, but I think that there's no question that one of the most important things that here, I've put up a link in the chat now to the upcoming events. One of the most important things that, trends that I notice in the academic publishing world is how important it is to get it out past just your small circle of confidants and friends and colleagues that sit in your cubicle, but rather how do we make sure that our research has impact? And that's something that we're going to be discussing with Marshall. So anyway, I encourage everyone to register or pass along to your departments any of these events that you think will be relevant, especially if you enjoyed this one. Fantastic. Okay, I am going to, I just got pinged on my phone with some of the top questions that were sent out. So we will read them here. And again, anyone who has additional questions, or if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, be in touch with me, be in touch with Katie. We are happy to answer any additional questions you may have, especially questions that are maybe more particular to your specific research. All right, can you talk a little bit about the time? What's the timeline from, let's say someone is all ready to go, which probably is rare, but from the time that you submit a full proposal until the book arrives in the mail? Okay,
so usually we get a proposal. I would say it takes a couple of weeks to, I'll read through it, send it to the series editor, talk to them, see if they're interested. So initial proposal review takes a couple of weeks. Then obviously you take whatever time you're going to need to write the manuscript. When we get the manuscript in, we say the peer review process usually takes about 2 to 3 months to complete. That gives us time to find, we like to have 2 reviewers for each manuscript. So that gives us time to locate 2 reviewers and also give them time to read the book. Then once the review comes back in, I'll take a look at it. Again, the series editors will take a look at it, see if they want to move ahead, if revisions are needed. If revisions are needed, again, that timeline is kind of on you. Depends on how long it takes you to complete the revisions. Once we get the final manuscript in, which includes, all of the text, any images, all of that, and we turn it over to our production department, production takes at most 6 months to complete. Sometimes it can be a little bit shorter than that, depending on how quickly the proofs go. But that's how long it takes. I should say that the production does not include copy editing. So if you want to have the manuscript copy edited, that will be done before we start production. Yeah, so 6 months at most. So in theory, it is possible to have a book published within a year, but that depends a lot on how quickly you write the manuscript, how quickly any revisions are done, that kind of thing. But I would say that for the time that it's with Brill, it's 8 to 9 months total, including peer review of the manuscript and publication time, or production time, excuse me.
Okay, got it, thanks. My colleague just made me aware that I was posting the links both to the upcoming events for ALE as well as the Calendly link for making a meeting with me in the waiting room, which is not very helpful. So I apologize about that. The links should now be available to everyone. And you can, as we're going through the Q&A, feel free to check that out and book a meeting as relevant. This is an interesting question, which I've been curious about. How much of a potential project can have been previously published, let's say in journals or as part of Festrifts or any other academic fora? Does that disqualify it automatically for being published as part of a Brill book, or is there a certain percentage? How does that work?
It doesn't disqualify it, but I would say that more and more we are shying away from republishing content that's already been published. So say, you have a bunch of journal articles and you want to pull them all into one place. We're shying away from that more and more, and here's why. It's part of the transition to online content. And because so much is published online now, people can access these resources in so many different ways. So for us to pull together content that's already been published and resell it, there's not necessarily a market for it because people can find the content other places. That's not to say that you can't include stuff that you've worked on before. Articles are part of a larger research. So maybe you did an article and it's a chapter in your book. You can certainly include it. I would say, maybe 20 to 30% of the volume can be stuff that's already appeared, but we'd still like the larger chunk to be stuff that's not been published yet. And I should also say, in terms of permissions for publishing your own content that you've published somewhere else, for the most part, I know at least with Brill, I would strongly encourage you to check with the original publisher. But usually with Brill, if you've published an article and you want to include it in a larger manuscript that you're doing, you have the right to do so. You just have to credit the original publication, just cite the original publication. In terms of permissions, I know that that's a question that comes up. So that's what Brill says. I think that most publishers operate that way, but I would encourage you to check with the publisher before just including the article.
Got it. Okay, great. And what about multiple submissions, either within Brill, meaning is it okay to send to 2 different acquisitions editors, or as well as to, let's say, Brill and another publisher at the same time? Is that acceptable?
I think you can do that at the proposal level. We do ask that we know. I think within Brill it's fine. Just know that the acquisitions editors are going to talk to one another. So if we know that it's been submitted to someone else, like obviously we don't want the same project in our system twice. But I think when that happens, like if you're not quite sure, is it really ancient Near Eastern studies or is it more biblical studies, and you're not really sure where it would best fit, then sure, send it to me and send it to my colleague Suzanne, who handles biblical studies. And we'll kind of take a look and say, we think maybe it'll really fit here or really fit there. In terms of sending it to Brill and somewhere else, that's fine. But usually, like I said, do it at the proposal stage, because I think most publishers would say that we don't want to invest time and in some cases money in doing a peer review of a project if you're not committed to keeping it with us. So I would say sending a proposal to a couple different places is fine, but once you get a provisional contract, know that you're locked in, or Brill is considered you locked in with us. Yeah.
Okay. And let's talk about while we're on this topic, let's talk about the financials for a second. I think you mentioned this, but can you just reiterate, what are the costs or expenses that are involved for authors? Are there, if the book is published with Brill, are there any royalties that come along? How does that work?
Yeah.
And maybe how that differs from some of the other publishers that are,
Yeah. So I think different publishers are set up in different ways. For Brill, if your proposal and your manuscript is fully accepted for publication, we do not ask for a subvention for publishing. With that said, we do not cover copy editing costs, which I think we talked about earlier, and also you're responsible for obtaining whatever permissions you need for the content of your book. So if you have images in your book or long quotes or other things that you need to get permissions to use, you're responsible for that. With that said, talk to your acquisitions editor. There may be some wiggle room in the budget. We may be able to find some funds to make it work, to help out with maybe some of the copy editing costs, maybe some of the permissions costs, but maybe not all of them. So, have a conversation with your acquisitions editor and see what's possible. Other than that, the only other charge would be if you're choosing to make your book open access. That would be the only other fee that we're asking for. In terms of other publishers, it varies. Some publishers ask for publication subventions to publish the book. Some ask if you want to include a lot of images, they ask for payment sometimes. It really depends. So it varies, but I think if that's something that you're questioning, then it's certainly something that you could ask the editor that you're talking to. Something just popped up in the chat about indexing costs. That's another thing. We ask the authors to do the index themselves. Again, that's something that we don't cover, but again, it's something that you can talk to your acquisitions editor about. It may be something that you can negotiate. The thing about an index is that if you think about each chapter and think about kind of the key terms from each chapter and then compile those, that will give you a basic index. But if you'd like a professional indexer, that's fine too. With regards to royalties, we do not, everything's negotiable. We do not automatically pay royalties, just bearing in mind too that, the margins for these books are relatively low because they're so specialized and they're such a limited audience. There isn't going to be huge sales on these volumes. And because we're covering a lot of the publication costs, there isn't a huge budget. So, royalties are negotiable. It doesn't hurt to ask, but understanding too that These are not going to be, New York Times bestsellers you can retire on, these royalties, kind of royalties.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Great. And we had an interesting question about books that have been published in another language. So let's say I'm an Italian scholar and I've published my research in Italian. Is Brill interested in, would they consider a translation, assuming that it was of high quality and for publication in English with Brill?
Absolutely. We've actually done that with quite a few volumes. Actually, Italian seems to be one of the languages that we get approached for the most, for whatever reason. So yeah, absolutely, we would consider publishing an English translation. And you can approach us and say, hey, I'm considering translating this work. Would you be interested? Because we can evaluate it at that point. Or if you'd like to do the translation first and come to us with the English version, that's fine too. I will say that we, translations are costly. So for an individual volume or a monograph, we don't really have the budget to cover the translations. Really, the only translations that we do where we cover the cost are really larger reference works. For example, there's one that I have, the Encyclopedia of Jewish History and Culture. It was originally published in German. We're now publishing the English translation, but that's a major reference work. That's a much different, much different animal, I guess, than a regular monograph. So.
Okay, and if people want to, discuss, funding opportunities for translation, I'm happy to do that with them.
Yes, and we're happy to refer people to you.
In terms of, I know we're jumping from topic to topic. I appreciate your flexibility here. In terms of length, does Brill have any specific requirements in terms of length of manuscripts, to a minimum length, a maximum length, a recommended length, or is it really up to the authors to do what they see fit?
Yeah, so usually what we say is we have a minimum of about 80,000 words, which equates to about 200 typeset pages. We calculate about 400 to 450 words per page for a standard size book, which is about 6 by 9 inches. Sorry, it's about, I'm not good with centimeters, sorry. So you can kind of, figure it out. If you know roughly what your word count is, you can figure out, okay, 400 words per page, about how many pages that would be. I would say most of our books are between 300 and 400 words. Sometimes we have more, sometimes we have less. I would say that, think about the bigger and bigger it gets, the thicker and thicker the book is, the more expensive it is to produce. We do have an upper limit in terms of the amount of pages we can fit in one binding, which is about 900 pages. But that's a really big book. But I would say technically our only requirement is a minimum of 80,000 words.
Got it. Okay, fantastic. And what do you consider books that are based on dissertations? People, and if you do, how would you recommend going about such a process? It's obviously a very different form and style of writing.
Absolutely.
And what are some of the pitfalls that people should be avoiding in that?
So we absolutely do publish revised dissertations, and I want to emphasize revised. We do not publish straight dissertations, and here's why. A lot of dissertations contain a lot of background information on the topic. And when you think about this, again, goes back to the audience. When you think about who's going to read your book, for Brill, if it's a specialized book like a dissertation research, the people who are going to be reading it are really going to want to read about your core research, your core argument. So your first couple chapters about the background that prove to your dissertation evaluators that you know what you're talking about aren't necessarily needed in a monograph. So when I say, like, the biggest change between a dissertation and a monograph is really taking your dissertation and boiling it down to your core research and your core argument, thinking that the people who are reading it already have the background information that you may have presented in your dissertation. But, there are a lot of resources. I would, talk to your advisors, talk to maybe the series editors, go online. There's a lot of information about how to revise a monograph, how to revise a dissertation into a monograph. So there are a lot of resources out there on how to do it.
Got it. Okay, you know what, Katie? I think fortunately, or fortunately for that matter, there are some more questions. Some of them are more particular to individual research, but we committed to an hour, and I think we've done a pretty good job sticking to that.
Okay.
So I want to take this opportunity really to thank you for sharing. I've learned things today, and I've been in this space for for plenty of time, so I have no doubt that many of the other participants learned as well. Again, I put in the chat my contact information if someone wants to book a meeting with me. If someone wants to speak with you, they should write you an email. And so I think that really brings us to the end. Again, I encourage people to check out our upcoming events in the next few months. And I know that, you know, taking time out of your schedules, you know, in a Corona world, with, you know, with children at home, or, you know, while juggling and balancing a lot of different things, is not a simple task. So I appreciate everyone who came and took the time, and thank you. And we hope to see you at future events and be in touch for your next manuscript.
Thank you.
Fantastic.